The Shadow Spectrum, Episode 9, The Punisher and the Victim, Cycles of Power and Pain, Sadism, Martyrdom, and the Language of Justice. Welcome back to the Linguiverse Presence, the Shadow Spectrum, where we unravel the languages our wounds have written and listen for the intelligence beneath what once seemed irrational. In this ninth reflection, we step into one of the most complex chambers of the human psyche, the place where pain dresses itself in principle and suffering dons the robe of righteousness. If the last episode asked us to trace our fear of chaos through the masks of order, control, and composure, then this one invites us deeper into the architecture of moral defense. Here in the courtroom of the psyche, our shadows don't shout, they argue. They plead cases, summon evidence, and pass verdicts, all in the name of justice. This is the terrain of the Punisher, the Victim King, and their rarely seen counterpart, the Arbiter. Together, they form a trinity of moral survival. Three distinct grammars of fairness shaped by injury, outrage, and the longing to make meaning out of harm. So take a steady breath. Notice where your body tightens when you think of fairness. The jaw that clenches, the chest that lifts, the spine that stiffens. These are not signs of moral clarity, but of moral memory, the body remembering where it once had no say. In this reflection, we'll examine the linguistics of blame, punishment, and moral theatre, the syntax of control, and the semantics of suffering. We'll ask not simply who's right, but what is righteousness protecting? We'll study how tone, timing, and phrasing can turn conviction into coercion, and how language, when reclaimed, can transform revenge into repair, because every moral stance begins as a survival posture, and every punishment hides a petition for fairness, the triad of moral survival. When the nervous system is wronged through betrayal, injustice, humiliation, or neglect, it seeks balance. In nervous system language, NSL, morality is not abstract, it's regulatory. The body craves evenness. It wants to level what feels tilted to right what has gone wrong. If warmth once met your pain, you learned reconciliation. If coldness met your pain, you learned retaliation. If silence met your pain, you learned internal arbitration, negotiating fairness within because the world refused to offer it without. From these experiences, three archetypal voices emerge. The Punisher, forged in fire, fluent in command. This voice equates order with safety. It restores equilibrium through control, retribution, or withdrawal of warmth. Its tone is decisive, its cadence clipped. The Punisher doesn't just want accountability. It needs it to breathe. The Victim King, shaped by tides of grief, fluent in emotional leverage. This voice equates suffering with sincerity. It seeks fairness through empathy, through the echo of its own ache. Its sentences bend under weight of after all I've done, and no one ever sees. The Arbiter, born from integration, fluent in balance. This voice equates clarity with compassion. It seeks fairness through comprehension, not control. The Arbiter pauses, listens, names what is, and refuses the seduction of sides. These are not villains or virtues, they are vocabularies of survival. Each one learns to speak fairness in the language available at the time of wounding. The Punisher, justice as protection. The Punisher's dialect is one of precision, crisp consonants, short clauses, and declarative authority. It's the voice of a nervous system that once felt powerless and now guards against chaos through certainty. Psychologically, this mirrors what Bandura, 1977, called moral disengagement, when empathy shuts down and righteousness rationalizes harm. Yet beneath the callousness lies a craving for coherence, the need to make inner pain visible through outer order. When you hear someone say, they need to learn, I'll make them see, or that's what they get, listen not for cruelty, but for closure. The Punisher's justice is a longing to witness remorse, to see the world flinch the way it once did, the Victim King. Suffering as sovereignty, the Victim King wields tenderness as testimony. In their language, to hurt is to be holy. Their sentences curl with implication, weaving guilt into grace. This is the voice of learned helplessness turned moral theatre. By holding pain aloft, they ensure it's never dismissed again. Yet their crown is heavy. The Victim King often confuses compassion with compliance, equating understanding with obligation. Their suffering becomes a sceptre and empathy, their empire. Where the Punisher commands, the Victim King laments. Both seek equilibrium, one by imposing it, the other by embodying it. The Arbiter, fairness beyond fury, and then there is the Arbiter, the quiet magistrate within. Its language is slower, its tone steadier, its questions sincere. It recognizes that fairness without feeling is theatre, and that peace imposed is not peace embodied. From a polyvagal perspective, Porges, 2011, the Arbiter speaks from ventral regulation, a state of grounded presence where curiosity and compassion coexist. It is neither rigid nor reactive. It does not confuse numbness for neutrality. Linguistically, the Arbiter's grammar invites participation. Help me understand what you need. Here's what fairness looks like to me. How can we move from fault to function? It's the syntax of stewardship, not superiority, power expressed through clarity, not coercion. Philosophically, this archetype echoes Aristotle's phronesis, practical wisdom, justice guided by discernment, not doctrine. The arbiter sees the good not as punishment's twin, but as its transcendence. The courtroom of the psyche, imagine a moment of deep betrayal. Someone you trusted breaks their word. Your body tenses, your mind rushes to construct narrative order. The punisher rises. They must pay. The victim king whispers, "Why me?" And somewhere deeper, the arbiter breathes. What truth is trying to be seen? This inner courtroom is not pathology. It's an ecosystem of fairness. The trouble begins when one voice dominates the bench. When the punisher presides unchecked, justice becomes cruelty. When the victim king reigns alone, pain becomes currency. When the arbiter is silenced, fairness fractures into factions. True justice, the kind that heals rather than harms, requires dialogue between all three. Justice, language, and the nervous system in the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, tone mirrors truth. The nervous system state determines not just what we say. For those shaped by pain, justice becomes not an abstract principle, but a performance of coherence. To feel wronged and remain voiceless fractures the self. To declare, "This is unjust," reassembles it. Fairness, then, is not a mere virtue, it's the architecture of survival. Yet in the shadow spectrum, every virtue risks distortion. The yearning for fairness, once a compass, can harden into a costume. We become the righteous one, the perpetual plaintiff, the avenger, or the saint of suffering, identities formed from imbalance. Each learns a linguistic choreography that keeps the play running, long after the audience has gone home. Justice as a nervous system need to grasp why fairness feels sacred. We must descend below doctrine into neurophysiology. In polyvagal theory, Porges 2011, safety is not purely sensory, it's relational. The nervous system calibrates trust through cues of mutuality. When fairness is absent, when promises are broken, voices silenced, or hierarchies abused, the body registers not mere disappointment, but existential threat. Justice, then, is regulation. Fairness is felt, not merely reasoned. A child whose caregiver punishes unpredictably learns hypervigilance. One whose protest is ignored learns collapse. Both internalize imbalance as identity. Over time, moral instincts entwine with survival codes. If I'm right, I'm safe. If I'm good, I'll be spared. If they hurt like I did, balance will return. The adult then reenacts these axioms through language tone, metaphor, and narrative framing. In mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, these utterances are somatic syllogisms, verbal structures that mirror embodied states. Righteous certainty reflects sympathetic activation, fight. Helpless lament, dorsal withdrawal, freeze, and measured curiosity, ventral regulation, flow. Thus, each archetype, punisher, victim king, and arbiter, does not merely believe in justice. It embodies a nervous system's attempt at equilibrium. The punitive syntax, control as coherence. In trauma linguistics, the grammar of control emerges where chaos once reigned. Those who feel or felt unseen in suffering may adopt declarative speech, short sentences, low pitch, emphatic stress. The form mirrors the function. If the world ignored your cries, you sculpt words sharp enough to cut through apathy. This is not cruelty, it is compensation. Each command conceals a question. Will you hear me now? From a psychodynamic lens, the punisher role evolves from introjected aggression. The psyche mimics the punishing parent to reclaim agency. The linguistic legacy is courtroom rhetoric, accusation, evidence, sentencing. It feels rational, but its roots are visceral, the body seeking parity by projecting its own pain outward. We might hear this voice say, "They got what they deserved." Someone has to set things straight. Weakness invites harm. Each phrase signals a nervous system allergic to ambiguity. To soften tone feels like surrender, to pause peril. The victim king's script, suffering a scepter in contrast, the victim king inherits the lexicon of lamentation. Their sentences spiral, laden with qualifiers and subtext. Rather than commands, they offer confessions, narratives dense with moral weight. Where the punisher speaks to restore order, the victim king speaks to restore empathy. Having once cried out unheard, they transform pain into parable. Linguistically, this archetype favors emotive syntax, overuse of "after all I've done," or "no one ever appreciates," metaphors of burden, "I carry everyone's weight," appeals to history, "I've always been the one." This is not manipulation in its essence, but mnemonic morality, remembrance turned rhetoric. Each repetition preserves dignity where neglect once erased it. Yet fixation becomes fossilization. When pain is wielded as proof, healing threatens identity. To let go of grievance can feel like vanishing. The arbiter's emergence, coherence over correction. Where these two dialects collide, a third begins to form, the arbiter, born from the integration of fire and flood. The arbiter's voice is not a compromise but a transcendence. The recognition that justice without empathy is tyranny, and empathy without accountability is erosion. In nervous system language, NSL, this corresponds to ventral regulation with cognitive flexibility, the capacity to hold paradox without collapse. Linguistically, the arbiter employs balanced phrasing, shared pronouns, and reflective cadence. Here's what I experienced. Can we compare notes? I want to understand your intent and own my impact. This is ethical grammar, syntax designed not to score but to steward. Philosophically, it mirrors Levinas's ethics of the face, the call to see the other not as an obstacle but obligation. In voice, it's less courtroom, more conversation, less verdict, more vessel, moral inflation. When justice becomes identity, the danger within moral theatre is ontological inflation, becoming the role we play. What began as a coping script ossifies into self-concept. I'm someone who stands up for what's right slides imperceptibly into, I'm only safe when I'm fighting. Language betrays the merger. I am the strong one. I am the victim. I am the fair one. Through the linguistic inflation of identity, verbs of action, I seek justice become verbs of being, I am justice. The psyche fuses doing with being, making change existentially threatening. In digital culture, this dynamic amplifies. The algorithm rewards outrage and martyrdom alike. The fiery punisher and the poetic victim king find infinite stage time. Justice becomes performance art, a feedback loop, a brand. The somatic stage beneath the rhetoric lies physiology. The punisher's breath is high and clipped, sympathetic dominance. The victim king's breath trembles or halts, dorsal drag. The arbiter breathes through speech, ventral flow. Each respiratory rhythm modulates prosody. The nervous system scores the script before the mind reads it. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, tone is telemetry, the sound of the body reporting its state. When justice is rigid, prosody flattens. When fairness flows, melody returns. Thus, moral maturity is not only cognitive, it is acoustic coherence. To evolve one's justice language is to retune one's breath. Case study. The broken contract. Consider a scenario. Two colleagues collaborate on a project. One invests deeply, the other claims credit. The punisher emerges. They'll regret crossing me. The victim king sighs. No one ever values my effort. The arbiter breathes. A boundary was crossed. How do I repair trust without revenge? Each response is linguistically distinct, physiologically patterned, and morally motivated. None is inherently wrong. Each reflects a phase of fairness. The task is integration, letting the arbiter hear both outrage and ache without letting either rule. Justice and grace. In theology, justice and grace are often cast as opposites. One demands payment, the other pardons. But psychologically, grace is justice matured, fairness infused with empathy. To extend grace is not to excuse, it's to exit the thing. Developmentally, this archetype often emerges from environments of moral inconsistency, caregivers whose promises fractured, rules shifted, or punishments arrived without pattern. Such conditions distort justice into a guessing game. The child learns, fairness is fragile, only firmness endures. This conviction matures into composure as a cudgel, emotional restraint wielded like a weapon. Calm becomes proof of control, and control the proof of worth. The adult punisher thus confuses poise with power, mistaking stillness for sovereignty. But composure alone does not equate to regulation. Somatically, it can signify sympathetic rigidity, a nervous system locked in readiness, masking agitation beneath stillness. What appears stoic may be frozen vigilance, not peace. This is the cage of clarity, when understanding becomes enforcement, and explanation eclipses empathy. The linguistics of law the punisher speaks a dialect of discipline, terse, declarative, definitive. In linguistic analysis, this maps to imperative syntax, clipped consonants, and descending tonal contours. Each sentence lands like a gavel, short, heavy, irrevocable. Examples. That's enough. Do it properly. You knew better. These utterances perform power through brevity and boundary. No excess words, no emotional qualifiers. Where the victim king seeks empathy through elaboration, the punisher asserts order through economy. Phonetically, consonant compression, e.g. the hard T and K sounds, mirrors muscular tension, jaw set, diaphragm tight, and vocal folds firm. In nervous system language, NSL terms, this is sympathetic dominance expressed acoustically. The voice becomes a vector of vigilance. The punisher's semantics often favor absolutism, always, never right, wrong. Linguistic binaries that simplify moral complexity into certainty. This reductionism soothes anxiety but starves nuance. Philosophically, it reflects Hobbesian logic. In a chaotic world, peace is preserved only by decisive rule. But justice, when stripped of curiosity, becomes jurisprudence without joy, order without openness. Pleasure and control. Sadism as displaced agency sadism, in its clinical sense, is not always cruelty for pleasure's sake. Often it is agency misdirected. For the punisher, control offers a neurochemical reprieve. In moments of command, cortisol dips, dopamine rises, and the body briefly remembers mastery. When life once rendered one powerless, discipline becomes dopamine. Every correction restores coherence, every consequence, a microdose of meaning. This is not malevolence, but misplaced medicine, a nervous system self-medicating with dominance. Yet such satisfaction bears a shadow. Control that began as containment can become compulsion. The punisher's creed, pain teaches truth, risks reproducing the very injuries it once endured. When love is linked to a lesson, intimacy becomes interrogation. This pleasure in precision extends linguistically. There is comfort in correction, security in semantics. To catch a misused word or flawed argument evokes not arrogance but affirmation, a subconscious whisper. I can still make sense of something. In this way, sadism is often a syntax of survival, the psyche's attempt to sculpt chaos into coherence, origins in betrayal. At the root of the Punisher lies a broken contract, perhaps a promise was made and severed, perhaps punishment arrived without cause. In either case, trust was fractured and fairness became an orphaned value. From this soil, retribution sprouts. The child's psyche, unable to appeal to justice externally, internalizes it as identity. If fairness failed me, I'll become fairness itself. But when the world offers no restoration, justice curdles into judgment. The Punisher learns to anticipate betrayal and preempt it through authority. Better to be feared than fooled. Philosophically, this mirrors Hobbes' Leviathan, the sovereign state born from the fear of chaos. Psychologically, it's an adaptive overreach, safety sought through subjugation. The tragedy is cyclical. In defending against betrayal, the Punisher risks becoming the very force once feared, exacting pain to prove protection. The philosophical frame. Hobbesian order Thomas Hobbes argued that life without order is nasty, brutish, and short. The Punisher lives this axiom somatically. In their worldview, peace is purchased through precision, freedom through fear. Where others trust flow, the Punisher trusts framework. To them, kindness without clarity breeds chaos, forgiveness without fairness, folly. Thus they idolize absolutism, laws unbent by empathy, emotions measured against reason. Yet Hobbes' logic, transplanted into the psyche, breeds inner authoritarianism, the self ruling the self through sanction. Every misstep is a misdemeanor, every mistake a moral trial. This internal state, what existentialists might term ethical solipsism, traps the psyche in perpetual policing. The inner child, once punished unjustly, now metes out justice endlessly. Somatic signatures observe the Punisher's body, jaw tense, shoulders square, movements precise. The gaze is steady, often unblinking, a vigilance masquerading as virtue. Breathing shallow but controlled. Gestures minimal, measured. These somatic tells reflect a nervous system bound to symmetry, each motion deliberate, each exhale earned. Stillness here is not serenity, but suppression, a freeze refined into finesse. Physiologically, this corresponds to chronic sympathetic arousal with parasympathetic overlay, the body braced yet balanced, ever ready yet restrained. Its composure as choreography, a ballet of boundaries rehearsed over years. In NSL, tone betrays tension, low prosody, narrow pitch range, clipped articulation. The voice is a metronome of mastery, reliable, rhythmic, rarely warm. Healing begins when the Punisher allows imperfection in posture, asymmetry in breath, and melody in voice. These micro-disorders reintroduce organicity, signaling safety through softness. NSL decoding, cold cognition as survival syntax from a mirror linguistic hypothesis lens, cognition mirrors physiology. When the body constricts, thought narrows. When breath tightens, logic sharpens. Thus the Punisher's cold cognition, analytical, detached, and decisive, is less pathology than posture. In trauma adaptation, sympathetic activation favors systemization. Emotional nuance, a luxury of safety, is suspended. Efficiency replaces empathy. This cognitive economy produces linguistic traits. Declaratives over interrogatives, statements to questions, monologic tone, lecture to dialogue, nominalization, concepts to connections. The result is semantic sterilization, truth trimmed of tenderness. But as regulation returns, cognition warms. The Punisher learns dialogic discourse. Help me understand. What do you need? Syntax that signals curiosity, not control. To teach body safety is to teach the tongue soft precision, statements held lightly, and conclusions revisable. Healing axis. From punishment to presence, healing the Punisher does not mean dissolving their discipline. It means redeeming it. The gift within attachment theory. This aligns with anxious preoccupied styles, where distress becomes the language of belonging. The child, unable to guarantee affection through assertion, learns appeal through affliction. In adulthood, this manifests as a subtle sovereignty, the throne of empathy, the crown of endurance. The victim king's influence is soft but seismic. Through sighs, stories, and symbolic surrender, he shapes the emotional climate around him. Yet control through collapse is still control. Beneath humility hides hierarchy, a moral order where those who hurt most hold the highest claim. Syntax of suffering. The grammar of grievance linguistically. The victim king speaks in qualifiers, conditionals, and poetic grievance. His sentences weave sadness and subtle supposition, shaping meaning through if-onlys and after-alls. Examples. If they truly cared, they'd have known. After everything I've done, this is how I'm treated. I guess it's always my fault. Each phrase performs emotive economy, trading direct demand for evocative expression. The goal is not confrontation but confirmation, to elicit recognition rather than resolution. Phonetically, this archetype favors upward inflection, tones that lift at the end, signaling uncertainty or appeal. In mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH terms, such prosody seeks attunement, resonance that reassures. Where the Punisher wields the gavel, the victim king offers the gospel, moral lessons laced with longing. His vocabulary is filled with shoulds and oughts, past participles of penance. Should have known, could have tried, would have cared. This syntax of suffering converts hurt into heritage, a shared narrative that sustains identity even as it limits agency. Somatic correlates. The posture of penance, observe the victim king's body, and you'll see gravity as grammar. Shoulders slope, a physical sigh, breath slows and softens as if mourning unspoken. Eyes avert, scanning for pity more than power. These gestures are not manipulative, they are mnemonic, encoding early lessons about safety. In nervous system language, NSL, this is dorsal venting, a form of parasympathetic expression designed to invite rescue. Each exhale becomes a summons, each pause a plea. The nervous system, having learned that assertion provokes abandonment, chooses implosion over explosion, silence over strike. Yet the cost is cumulative. Chronic collapse invites caretakers but starves the self. To be perpetually pitied is to be perpetually peripheral, loved for fragility, not fullness. The covert contract, debt as devotion. At the heart of the victim king's psychology is the covert contract, an unspoken agreement that binds pain to payment. The logic is emotional, not ethical. Because I have suffered, you should understand. Because I gave, you should reciprocate. Because I endured, you should stay. In transactional analysis, Byrne, 1964, this maps to, if it weren't for you scripts, relational loops where blame veils are needed. The victim king externalizes agency, converting requests into records, but unmet expectation mutates into entitlement. What began as an appeal becomes an accusation. You let me down again. And so suffering, once sacred, ossifies into scorekeeping, pain tallied into proof. To break this cycle, one must convert a covert contract into a conscious covenant, voicing need as need, not narrative. Philosophical layer, martyrdom as meaning. From a phenomenological view, martyrdom grants coherence. In senseless suffering, purpose preserves the psyche. The victim king thus becomes philosopher. If I must hurt, let it have meaning. This mirrors existentialist theology, where endurance ennobles existence. Yet meaning borrowed from misery risks metaphysical inflation, the belief that virtue increases with volume of pain. Culturally, this archetype echoes ascetic traditions, saints who sanctify suffering, poets who equate heartbreak with truth. But what was once sacred self-sacrifice can devolve into psychological performance, a theatre where agony authenticates. Martyrdom provides identity, healing demands humility. To step down from the throne of thorns is to ask, who am I without my wounds? Linguistic anthropology. Grievance as group glue. On a collective scale, grievance is glue. Shared suffering binds communities. From laments in scripture to protest songs, narratives of pain forge belonging. In linguistic anthropology, such storytelling functions as solidarity syntax, turning trauma into tradition. Yet when internalized individually, it can imprison. The victim king carries a tribal template in a personal psyche, repeating ancestral refrains. We endure, therefore we are. But belonging need not be built on bleeding. Language can evolve from elegy to empathy, from look what they did to here's what we'll build. MLH framing. Resonance and reach. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, the victim king's vocality reflects searching resonance, tones that trail upward, rhythm that slows, vocabulary steeped in metaphor. These are not signs of weakness, but signals of seeking, attempts to draw attunement through acoustics. However, resonance without rootedness risks recursion, circling sorrow without synthesis. True healing requires shifting from lamentation to localization, speaking from pain, not as pain. When resonance steadies, reflection returns. The voice lowers, phrases shorten, and the body begins to breathe safety rather than signal for it. Healing path. From accusation to articulation, the victim king's liberation lies not in denying suffering, but reframing it. Pain need not be performance. Grievance need not be gospel. The path begins with agency reclaimed through articulation. Replace "you never listen" with "I need to feel heard." Replace "after all I've done" with "I'd like appreciation." Replace "no one cares" with "I'm longing for connection." Each translation returns ownership, transforming lament into language. In NSL, this marks a shift from appeal to assertion, ventral activation through voiced need. Somatically, breath deepens, shoulders lift, eyes meet. The spine straightens not in defiance but in dignity. Philosophically, it's a reorientation from virtue as victimhood to virtue as vitality, goodness measured not by endurance, but evolution. Reflection. When did pain become your proof? Recall a time when you leaned on sorrow to secure sympathy. What truth waited beneath the tear? What need went unnamed? Identification activity. Note one phrase you repeat when wronged. Perhaps "it's always me" or "no one cares." Translate it into a direct need. I need reciprocity. I need reassurance. Integration practice. Practice self-validation statements. I see my hurt. I hold my hope and space. My feelings are evidence, not edicts. I deserve empathy, even from myself. Speak wronged. Arbiter. Something between us went wrong. This linguistic shift dissolves the dichotomy. Through inclusive phrasing, justice becomes co-constructed meaning, not power over, but presence with. In restorative justice theory, Zier 2002, repair is relational. Wrongdoing is a rupture in a relationship, not simply a rule broken. The Arbiter embodies this ethic prioritizing dialogue over dominance. His tone mirrors this, midline resonance, steady rhythm, even pacing. No clipped consonants, no sighing vowels, only breath synchrony, the embodied grammar of grace. Philosophically, this reflects Ubuntu, I am because we are. Wrongdoing injures the web, not just the node. Healing must therefore be communal coherence, linguistic recalibration. From you to we, the Arbiter's voice reveals pronoun progression, a linguistic signature of integration. You hurt me, externalized blame, I'm hurting, self-recognition. We got hurt, shared system insight. This progression maps emotional maturity, from reaction to reflection to relational regulation. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, pronouns function as perceptual pivots, shifting the locus of control and compassion. You isolates, I individuates, we integrate. Even grammar in the Arbiter's mouth becomes gentle geometry. Declaratives soften into invitations, imperatives dissolve into options. Questions outnumber claims. These microshifts restore polyvagal safety. The body hears inclusion and exhales. Somatic neutrality, breath synchrony, balanced posture in nervous system language, NSL. Equilibrium is expressed through somatic neutrality, breath steady, shoulders squared yet soft, voice supported from the diaphragm, not the throat. The Arbiter's physiology models ventral vagal tone, Porges, 2011, heart rate variability high, facial muscles relaxed, gaze direct but gentle. Such presence co-regulates others. Emotional contagion becomes conscious, resonance as restoration, not reaction. When body and voice synchronize, conflict softens. The Arbiter knows that to be heard, one must first be holdable. He enters conversations not as commander or confessor, but container. Stillness here is not suppression, as in the Punisher, nor submission, as in the Victim King. It is stability, the poise that permits plurality, MLH and NSL integration. Resonance of restoration in MLH terms, restorative resonance is midline. Tones neither rise in appeal nor fall in authority, but hover in harmony. The Arbiter's speech is rhythmic, paced to breath, grounded in semantic congruence. What is said aligns with what is sensed. In NSL, this alignment is somatic literacy, the ability to recognize physiological cues and translate them into transparent language. My chest feels tight, I might be bracing. My breath is shallow, I'm trying to stay composed. Such utterances transform reaction into revelation, and body cues become conversation cues. By voicing the internal state, the Arbiter creates a feedback loop of trust. Others mirror the regulation they witness. The dialogue becomes a resonance circuit, attuned and adaptive. Philosophical bridge. From retribution to restoration, philosophically, the Arbiter's justice draws from restorative and relational ethics, truth as tether, not weapon. Where the Punisher seeks order through fear, and the Victim King seeks fairness through pity, the Arbiter restores balance through understanding. This recalls Aristotle's notion of equity, epiakia, bending rigid law to fit fluid reality. It also echoes Ubuntu's communal ontology, where reconciliation preserves social fabric. Grace, then, is not indulgence, but intelligence, the awareness that every rupture carries a request for recognition. The Arbiter asks not, who deserves blame, but what balance seeks restoration. In language, this manifests as conditional kindness, phrases like, let's find what's fair, or we both hold part of this. Justice becomes a joint inquiry. Emotional literacy. Apology, amends, acknowledgement. Mature justice requires emotional vocabulary, naming the need beneath the narrative. The Arbiter practices triadic repair. 1. Apology, I see my part. 2. Amends, here's how I'll restore. 3. Acknowledgement, I understand your experience. Each phrase repairs not reputation, but resonance. Unlike performative apology, I'm sorry you feel that way, restorative language assumes shared impact. What I did had consequences, I'd like to help them heal. Through this syntax, the Arbiter transforms guilt into growth, accountability into alignment. Reclaiming fairness as fluid, grace as grammar justice when alive is fluid fairness, adaptable, reflective, rhythmic. The Arbiter's wisdom is contextual compassion, knowing when mercy mends more than metrics. Grace becomes grammar, the structure that supports truth without strangling it. Where once the gavel fell, now pauses punctuate. Silence becomes syntax for sincerity. In this linguistic ecology, rightness is relational, not rigid. To be fair is to be flexible, to bend without breaking, to balance without bias. Grace is not softness, but strength without sharpness, the tone of trust restored. Reflection prompt. What would mercy sound like in your voice? Experiment aloud. How does forgiveness alter tone, pacing, and pronouns? Does mercy sound lighter, slower, lower? Notice the nervous system's shift. Does your breath deepen as blame dissolves? Identification activity. Rewrite a past verdict into a vow. Take a sentence like they'll never change and evolve it into next time, I'll communicate my boundaries sooner. Move from judgment to jurisdiction. What power is truly yours? Integration practice. Practice restorative speech, one phrase of shared repair. Examples: we both wanted to be heard. Let's rebuild trust slowly. I forgive without forgetting. I'll stay conscious, not closed. Each sentence becomes a syllable of sovereignty, justice voiced through gentleness. The semantics of release, from retribution to recognition. Every story of justice ends with a question. Who will let go first, the wound or the will? For the psyche, this moment is sacred. It is the juncture where punishment exhausts its language and silence begins to sing. When vengeance has lost its vocabulary, what remains is release, not an erasure, but a retranslation. Release is not a weakness. It is the ultimate linguistic evolution, the shift from external sentence to internal sense-making, from the syntax of blame to the semantics of balance. It begins when the voice once raised in retribution learns the rhythm of recognition, when you must pay transforms into I must heal. Release as relanguaging in narrative therapy, White and Epstein, 1990. Healing emerges when one re-author the story of harm, not deleting the chapter, but changing its grammar. The punitive plotline, they owe me, converts to a recognition arc. I understand what shaped me. This is not surrender. It is semantic sovereignty, reclaiming authorship over the meaning of memory. Where the punisher clings to correction and the victim king clings to confession, the releaser speaks a third dialect, completion. Completion is not closure by coercion, but coherence through compassion. It arises when the nervous system, philosophical insight. Forgiveness as freedom from fixation. Forgiveness, in its purest form, is freedom from fixation. It is not forgetting nor condoning, but ceasing to orbit. Nietzsche, 1887, warned of resentment, the soul's entrapment in cycles of retaliation. The one who cannot forget becomes the one forever defined by the harm. To forgive, then, is an act of ontological independence, severing the gravitational pull of grievance. In existential terms, Frankl, 1946, it is the reclamation of meaning-making, the power to decide what a memory signifies. Forgiveness is not about the offender's redemption, but the offended's redefinition. The question becomes, am I willing to exist beyond this event? When the answer is yes, the syntax shifts from imperative to indicative, from you must to I am. Forgiveness is the grammar of freedom, transforming command into condition, and condition into consciousness. NSL practice. The exhale statements to embody release. Practice linguistic exhalation, sentences designed to physiologically cue surrender. In SL, these are completion cues guiding breath and body. I let go. Paired with slow exhale, eyes softened. I am done. Shoulders drop, jaw loosens. I return. Hands open, diaphragm free. Each phrase encodes temporal closure, a movement from past tense fixation to present tense freedom. Say them aloud. Observe tone and texture. The more air between syllables, the more space within the self. MLH framing. Coherence as catharsis in MLH. Coherence is the mirror of completion. A self fragmented by retribution speaks in dissonance, jagged tones, contradictory clauses, looping refrains. As coherence emerges, language becomes lyrical but linear, each thought connected, each tone consistent. Catharsis, then, is not mere release of emotion, but realignment of meaning. It is the resonance of truth unburdened by tension. To reach this state, one must exchange righteousness, which seeks echo, for recognition, which seeks essence. Catharsis is the sound of semantic surrender, the voice returning to its natural key. Integration. Recognition over repetition. Every unhealed wound repeats. Every recognized wound resolves. Recognition, the act of seeing oneself within the story, dissolves the need for external justice. When one recognizes, I am not the punishment nor the plea, but the presence aware of both, duality dissolves. Repetition ceases because the psyche no longer needs rehearsal. What was once sought through reenactment is now integrated through insight. This is the final alchemy, from repetition to recognition, from righteousness to resonance, and from retribution to restoration. The voice that once declared war now whispers wisdom. Reflection prompt. What word would set you free? Is it enough? Done. Home. Speak it aloud. Notice the shift, tone deepens, breath expands, time slows. The nervous system recognizes resolution before the mind does. Identification activity. Record a monologue of closure. Speak your own ending to a lingering story. Then listen back. Attend not to content, but to cadence. Where tone loosens, release lives. Integration practice. Practice one forgiveness phrase daily. I release what no longer requires repair. Repeat until it becomes a rhythm, not a ritual, a way of walking through memory without weight. Closing reflections. We began this exploration tracing the architecture of punishment and pity, the iron bars of blame, the velvet ropes of victimhood. Along the way, we discovered their hidden intelligence. That control was once protection, and collapse once communication. The Punisher, for all his severity, taught us the virtue of structure, that boundaries, though brittle, can become bridges when softened by empathy. The Victim King, for all his lamentation, revealed the wisdom of weakness, that to cry is to confess the desire for care. And the Arbiter, sitting between them, harmonized the two, reminding us that fairness is not a verdict, but a vibration. In integrating these archetypes, we move from the rigid justice of reactivity to the responsive justice of resonance, where power is presence, not punishment, where righteousness rings with rhythm, not rigidity. Righteousness reframed becomes resonance, the sound of truth sung softly enough to include every voice. Discernment without domination, compassion without collapse. This is the grammar of grace, the new syntax of sovereignty. Justice, when purified, ceases to strike. It steadies, it listens. It does not demand symmetry, but seeks coherence. And coherence, the alignment of word, tone, and truth, is the highest form of peace. So we close this chapter not with a gavel, but a gaze, one that sees each side as sacred, each stance as a stage in evolution. Ask yourself gently, do I seek repair or revenge? The answer determines whether your justice heals or hardens. Power purified becomes peace, and peace, in turn, becomes presence. As justice softens into grace, the psyche often retreats, weary of conflict, wary of connection. When exhaustion masquerades as enlightenment, and distance is sanctified as strength, we meet the next duality, the ghost and the soldier. Here, silence becomes scripture and duty becomes disguise. The ghost vanishes in the name of peace, mistaking detachment for divinity. The soldier marches on in the name of purpose, mistaking rigidity for righteousness. Together, they form the next dialect of the shadow, absence. Absence of voice, of vulnerability, of visceral presence. In episode 10, we'll explore emotional withdrawal, spiritual bypassing, and identity through service. We'll listen for the syntax of absence, brevity, logic, silence, and uncover the truths trembling beneath. For even avoidance articulates in omission, in pause, in posture. The question is not whether silence speaks, but what it says. Reflection prompt. What truth hides in your detachment? Practice activity. Write the words you never say, because even silence speaks, and absence too has a language. May your justice be gentle, your truth tempered, and your power participatory. When you speak of fairness, may it sound like freedom. And when you seek closure, may you find coherence instead. Until our next reflection, speak with integrity, listen with presence, live with alignment. You've been listening to the Linguiverse Presence, the Shadow Spectrum. I'm James Miller.